Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Camilla Johnston, and I'm the sales director at the Lapis Press in Culver City. We are really thrilled to have you all with us for our first of many Zoom conversations in the new world of COVID. We're going to be doing more of these, and we join our mailing list, and I'm sure the Carnegie is going to be doing more conversations online as well, so be sure to be up to date with them as well. Today's conversation brings together two Los Angeles organizations and institutions that have really deep roots in the community and emphasize the city's long history of contributions to both art and science. The Lapis Press was founded in 1984 by artist Sam Francis and was created with the goal of producing unusual and timely projects in a variety of mediums, formats, and everything from lithographs and etchings to poetry and Jungian philosophy. It was a place created by artists for artists, with the understanding that medium and technology should not be a prohibitive determinant in an artist's practice. We believe that we continue in this mission and in this vein by striving to be a place that artists are able to explore new techniques and technologies, thereby expanding the scope of their imagination and their toolbox. We are also joined today by the Carnegie Observatories, headquartered in Pasadena. The organization's history dates back to 1904, when the Carnegie Institution of Washington granted funding to found the Mount Wilson Solar Observatory, which is remarkably close to us near Pasadena. Today, the observatories are a unique and important place for scientists who are similar to artists to pursue their ideas and research with complete freedom and without the pressures of searching for funding or teaching, which is a rare opportunity, particularly right now when science is constantly being threatened. The incredible minds there are working on everything that you can imagine having to do with astronomy and the outer worlds, everything from universe expansion to dark energy, as well as developing the actual technological advances that allow them to do so. And more recently, they've been using their labs to produce masks for the COVID crisis. The majority of today's conversation will be between Matthew Brandt and John Mulchaey. Matthew is a contemporary artist based in Los Angeles. He received his BFA from Cooper Union and his MFA from UCLA. Matthew's practice is mostly grounded in photography, but he finds a way to bend and push the medium beyond traditional conceptions of photography, often incorporating physical elements of the subject itself into the work. He has an incredibly impressive CV. Just to give you a brief example, his work can be found in the permanent collections of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Getty, Guggenheim, LACMA, the National Gallery of Art, the High Museum, the Brooklyn Museum, and many, many others. You can read it all online. John Mulchaey is the director of the Carnegie Observatories. He received his Bachelor of Science in Astrophysics from UC Berkeley and his PhD from the University of Maryland. Starting in graduate school, John has worked extensively with, get ready for this, space-based X-ray telescopes and larger telescopes, such as the Magellan, to further his research on the nature of galaxy groups. On top of all of this, John is a frequent consultant for NASA and the National Science Foundation. He launched the observatory's lecture series, the Discover Science Project, which brings astronomy into children's classrooms, and many of the outreach activities of the organization. John and Matthew will be joined later in the conversation by a few other people, one of which is Erica Clark, who is the Strategic Initiatives Coordinator at the Carnegie. Although she is currently at a scientific organization, I would be remiss to not mention Erica's tremendous contributions to the artistic community, where she spent years with the Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles and the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden. She is a wealth of institutional knowledge for both of those organizations and contributed tremendously. Christy-Ann Hanich will also be joining us later. She's the senior printmaker at the Lapis Press. Christy is an incredible artist in her own right and has been with Lapis for 14 years. She is a true treasure trove of experience and knowledge in producing and making prints and multiples. Christy has spread this important knowledge to younger generations, previously teaching at Cal Arts and Otis College of Art and Design. Last but not least, Anthony Nicholas, the owner and managing director of the Lapis Press, will also be joining us. Tony is on the Getty Museum Photo Council and was a founding board member of Inner City Arts. He and his family have incredibly deep roots and connections in the Los Angeles arts and culture community, particularly in the creation of the Walt Disney Concert Hall and the founding of the Museum of Contemporary Art Los Angeles. And fun fact, Tony, some time ago, created and was nominated for a movie, was nominated for an Academy Award for a movie he made, so he is also an important artist. I think that's enough for the introductions and the background for everyone, so that way everyone from both sides, the Carnegie and the Lapis side, have a better understanding of who's joining us today. I'm going to mute all the other windows for a brief time and let Matthew discuss his process and give us some insight into the actual making of these works and how they were created. While he's doing so, I'm going to be running through some images of the works and also some of the source material. And then we'll launch into Matthew and John getting started. So give me 1 second and we will mute everyone else's screen. And I'm going to, there we go. Okay. Let's see, Matthew, if you want to
start talking
to me in 1 second and give us some background on the process itself, if that'd be great, Matthew.
Oh yeah, of course. Hi everyone, first off. So what you're basically looking at are some inkjet prints that were made. They're all about, oh, it has a size here, 34 inches tall. And I guess simply put, they're pictures looking into boxes held up to the sun. Oh, I'm sorry, they're pictures of boxes. So imagine your head in a box. It's held up to the sun with holes punched in them. So you're looking at the sun flares through these holes. And that's sort of the straightforward version, but I really like this idea of someone putting their head in the box and seeing the universe. And it's just sort of like a very sort of simplistic idea, but it all started maybe about 3 years ago when I was introduced to Carnegie through Lapis Press. And I think that Lapis knew that I did a previous project that had to do with astronomy photographs, and was another project I made called Night Skies. And they were curious if I might have something interesting to make with working with Carnegie. And so I visited the archive, really beautiful space. I mean, it was in the basement in Pasadena, and it's sort of, you go down and there's a big steel vault door. It felt like I was like robbing a bank in the early 1900s, and like all this beautiful oak cabinetry holding these glass plate negatives. It was very like Pasadena regal, beautiful. And I guess it just sort of felt really nice, and seeing the preciousness of the glass plate negatives and just sort of getting a feel for the space, and not knowing what to make, but I feel like I was getting a lot out of it. But amongst all these beautiful oak cabinetry, it was also, you know, where they store the negatives and stuff. There were also these cardboard boxes. You can see some like sitting around, and, you know, maybe some of the negatives that didn't quite make it into the oak wood, or I don't even know if it's oak, but just a nice wood. Maybe they got held there. And there's like a food box. So these are actually some of the boxes that I used to make the pictures. So I got as many of these boxes as I was allowed to take, and ended up also getting some images of digital scans of the glass plates that were taken at Wilson Observatory. And I essentially translated those images onto the backs of the boxes. So where there was a star, I would punch a hole into the box and essentially correspond it. So you're essentially looking at images translated through the box, if that makes sense. So where there was a star, where there was a light on the negative, there was I punched a hole. So this is a very dense field, and I try to do the best I can, but you know, there's only so much pushing you could do with a push pin in cardboard. And then essentially, once I have the boxes, I hold it up to the sun and I photograph it. And a lot of these images are a compilation of, it could be over 50 photographs. So I'm adopting some of these techniques of astronomy photography where they, to get resolution, they piece together a lot of these images. And so, I mean, more or less, that's how I made these. I don't know what else I could say, but I'm sure we can get into some other things, but it's my rambling explanation.
No, that's perfect. I think I'll launch into it and let you and John get started, but I think of a Freudian slip that I made earlier that would be an important way to discuss is actually the similarity between artists and scientists, even though there might be a different translation, it's actually the same language in some ways, particularly with an institution such as the Carnegie, where the scientists are allowed to do their job without having the pressures of searching for funding, is kind of the same as an artist having backing from a gallery where they're allowed to make their work. So maybe it would be helpful if you both were to just launch into that idea, is that there's a lot more similarities between artists and scientists than might be initially thought of. And I'm gonna hide myself and let you two discuss.
All right, Matthew, do you want to go first or do you want me to go?
I don't know. I mean, I have to say I'm a little nervous and intimidated by you.
I'll go first then, make it easy for you. So I think, astronomy, of course, a key component of astronomy is images and taking images. And astronomers really, all of our science is based on light and being able to collect light. It's unlike, I always tell people, it's really unlike, chemistry or physics, where you can often do an experiment or set up an experiment in your lab, or my biology friends who can go and recreate their experiment many times over. As astronomers, we really rely on what the universe gives us, and what the universe gives us is light. And so we have to just collect that light, and that's really what we have to work with. And so clearly a lot of your work, Matthew, particularly this work, of course, is all really about light again and images. So I think there's a really very close connection there. And I thank you for your explanation. I thought that was really great to understand how you came about making these pieces.
Yeah, I mean, that's what attracted me. I mean, I feel like it's very much, it's a photographic process, and I think that's what intrigued me with trying to think about astronomy photography and work with it. I mean, even though I'm working with like a small Canon 5D, you got this 25-footer, 600-footer, whatever. You know what I mean? I feel like it's partially the same thing, and I think it's about how do you capture that light to different degrees and what you get from it, and a certain, I'm sure there's a workaholicness to it that keeps you going. You get obsessed about something and you keep prying at it. Well,
that's right, and I think so. It's interesting to me because when you first came to visit, we took you to the archive. I would have never in 100 years figured out that this is what you would have decided to do. Like the fact that you found the boxes so interesting is really interesting. But before I talk about that, though, I wanted to show people who aren't familiar with the plates, when we talk about the archive, what we're talking about. So here's a very famous, this is not the real plate. This is a replica of really the most famous photographic plate ever taken. This was taken by Edwin Hubble back in 1923. And this was an important plate. I often say the most important plate ever taken, because this plate was used to show that these fuzzy objects in the sky were in fact very, very distant galaxies, which really led to our understanding of the universe being a universe. And so that plate archive that we took you down to has 250,000 of these plates. It really is the most important collection of plates in the world because it has the work of Edwin Hubble and other very famous astronomers that really helped establish all of modern astronomy. So, when I've been fascinated, we stopped using a little bit about the plates, perhaps, for people who might be interested in that. This was really how all of astronomy was done until the mid to late 1980s. And so basically what you would do is you have a piece of glass, you would put a photographic material on the glass surface, you put that basically in the beam of the telescope, and you basically are getting a negative right on the glass plate. And so that's what these 250,000 plates are. They're just all these images that were taken at Mount Wilson, and actually even prior to Mount Wilson, from the late 1800s to about 1988, 89. I was an undergraduate at Berkeley in the late 80s, and so unfortunately I never used photographic plates. I came along right when I was coming along, digital detectors, very similar to the cameras you have on your phones. were what we were using. And so in fact, that's how all modern astronomy is done. They have the advantage, the digital detectors, of course, in that they're very, very sensitive. A typical glass plate like these collect only about 1% of the light that hits it is actually collected. So you had to go very long. These integrations that you use for these images that you used were taken over hours sometimes, where now you could do that same image in a second with a modern telescope. And so this was really hard work back in the days. So we have these 250,000 plates. They're very unorganized, as you know from your visits.
They look organized.
Yeah, well, they're a little more organized than they used to be. We've spent some effort doing that, but we don't even have a complete catalog of them. There's just that many of them. And what often happens is astronomers who worked here in the past, when they retire, they keep sending me plates. So we keep adding plates. People take their plates with them. They've taken them to other parts of the world and they're coming back. And so, but we have this huge thing of plates, and they're stored in lots of different ways. So what's interesting to me is so you might want to talk a little bit, you showed the boxes a little bit, but what was it about the boxes that you found so interesting?
Is Camilla watching?
Well, I think for me, the boxes, there's certain things that, like I mentioned earlier, like putting your head in the box and seeing the universe, this kind of like Plato's cave situation that I think was interesting for me, because I thought these boxes not only had a kind of, we talked about light exposures and photography being about light exposures, but I think there's another kind of exposures that maybe these boxes had with the plates that, maybe it's like a physical touch exposure. Just, I imagine these were the boxes that they had readily available in Mount Wilson before they brought them down. You know what I mean? They like brought them down the mountain in these boxes before they made their way maybe to the wood boxes or whatever, but it's physically holding these plates and that like physical exposure, kind of imbuing these boxes with the history that I found interesting. And also, I think that there's kind of a cool thing that happens when you think about the limitations of the box and, our own perceptions. And even, like there's the facade or the plateau of the box. I feel like with the telescope, there is the same plateau. There's a certain range. You have the 60-footer. Okay, that wasn't enough. Let's get the 100-footer. And then it keeps going. And then I'm sure you're building a bunch of other ones, and it's going to keep going. And for me, there's some shallower boxes, and then there was a couple bigger boxes. And for me, there was a kind of analogy for the telescope and thinking about this plateau of knowledge that happens, because you always want to get a little bit further, right? But we're stuck with what we have. And I feel like it inevitably becomes about like technologies and what we have. And I kind of liked this idea of these pictures of boxes, like in contrast to, like that image of the extreme distance field image, where it's like the opposite of these boxes, and have that like oxymoronic image of the box and then have that. I don't know. I felt like an interesting analogy to look into space and then be stuck with this box and then have a certain representation and that analogy of the limitations.
It's really
so
good.
Maybe too wordy, but yeah.
No. I think you got it right. And it just is an interesting analogy. And you're absolutely right about telescopes. I mean, the bigger the telescope you build, it gives you a new capability. You kind of expand the box in some sense, being able to see further and further back or deeper and deeper. And so that's really true. Let me ask you a question. So you found the boxes, which were kind of cool and interesting. And then you had to pick photographic plate or the actual image of the star field or whatever. I'm wondering how you selected those. What did you just walk around and look at a bunch? Did you pick? You have one that has Hubble's name on it. I'm guessing that was the attraction in that case.
Oh yeah, I mean, of course you got to throw in a Hubble. That's like that's the go-to, right? And I'm glad you also brought out the VAR, the plate, because looking at that image, I feel like there's a lot of emotion in that, because you could tell the way that he wrote VAR is like in haste, and the discovery of that, and it's like red. There's like a drama to that negative, and there's like the science cleanliness of the plate, but then scratching on it, I feel like there's something imbuing these things with such physicality. It really attracted to me, because that's kind of what I try to do too. When I make a picture, I try to work with the material of the site and try to get physical with it. And I feel like that's what's nice about seeing that archive and seeing like the handwritten notes and stuff like that on the side. It's very different than, I mean, I take digital pictures, but there's something that is nice to have that physicality. But sorry, what was the original question? I think I went off.
I don't know, but I love what you just said because, well, let me just take a second and explain for people who don't know. So, the plate is taken, but in this particular case, this very famous one, there's writing on it. So the astronomers would actually they would actually do their analysis directly on the plate, where of course today we would just do it on our computer. But in this particular plate, that VAR is in this red, kind of pink red color. There's actually many historic scientific papers being written about that VAR. The VAR stands for variable because what Hubble had realized is he had found a very special type of star, a variable star, that he could use to measure the distance to Andromeda. And he has an exclamation point because he realized once he had this star that he could measure the distance to this object that no one had been able to measure. And so it was really a moment, as you said, a moment of excitement. And you can see that the fact that he did it.
Sure.
There's a lot of controversy about what, the VAR is written in red versus everything else is in black. Did he use fingernail polish? There's all sorts of papers that people write about this. No one, unfortunately, will probably ever know. But you do see the excitement. And I think you're right. I mean, there's an excitement behind when you have a discovery like this. And as astronomers like myself, we've had these moments. You get these aha moments. And that's pretty fascinating. So my question, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, no. What was your question? You go first.
I think my original question was, how did you select various images?
I think it was really just, I think you guys sent me a bunch of different images, like scans. So I had a wealth of images to choose from, maybe what you had available. And some of it was basically fit according to the box size, like what would match well. But there's also just some practicality things, like it's really hard to translate like a really wispy, galaxy image because it really just doesn't look good when you punch it, and then it would just fall apart, right? I mean, which may be more interesting than what I had, but I was also thinking about the calluses I was building on my fingers as I was making the next one, perhaps. But I was thinking about some images were more simplistic and some had the swirl in it, and it was really more intuitive. Like, I think this would really look good on this box, and I didn't really go through in any sort of scientific manner of like what,
sure.
In terms of like alphabetical or anything like that. But it was basically what I had available and what I could make. And then as I made one, then it was like, oh, I learned some things that might work better. And then you make another one, then make another one. So then, this project was going on for like a long time. So I had a lot of time to sort of make the boxes, collect them, and punch all the holes and take photos and look at them again. Yeah. But I actually had a question, and what inspired some of the hole punching were when I visited the Carnegie Institute, there's also a very impressive, large, like laboratory, industrial space upstairs. And there were these giant aluminum discs with holes punched in them. I believe they're used to put over the lens to isolate stars.
Yes.
What are those called?
Those are called spectroscopic masks.
Oh,
I don't know if I have any right here. I was hoping I actually had one. I don't know if I do. And those are used, basically we use those in a telescope. The idea is that you would take an image like this. You would identify all the interesting objects just as you did for your image. And what we want to do in that case is we want to go beyond the image and kind of analyze the light from the object. And to do that, we use spectroscopy, which is basically, everybody's familiar with the concept of spectroscopy a bit because you've seen a prism. You take a prism and you put light in, solar light in, it splits it up into the colors of the rainbow. All you're doing is you're just basically splitting the light up in fine detail. And so that's called spectroscopy. So we do that in astronomy to try to understand what something's made of, how hot it is, how far away it is, all these various characteristics. And so what we can do these days is we can take an image like the images you did, identify all the interesting objects, and then we can make a mask. And the idea is that wherever there's a hole in the mask, we put a hole where all the objects are. And you put that in your telescope. The light from those just those objects goes to your spectrograph, and you can obtain this information. And so, yes, these days, that's a very powerful technique. That's how most of us do astronomy. And in some ways, it's very similar to what you did with your box.
I mean, that's what I was going to say, because that's what I ripped off, essentially. Oh. Like, I saw those big discs. I'm like, oh, how does that work? What is that? So, I mean, a lot of these techniques I'm just appropriating from what you do, and it was imputed into the project. So I'm kind of trying to work with it. But I'm glad you told me what it was, because I was Googling discs, aluminum disc, telescope, and like I couldn't figure out what it was called, but thank you.
Yeah, it's a spectroscopic mask. They are, that's pretty, you wouldn't find a lot of that on Google, because this is the sort of thing that there's only, you know, a few thousand astronomers in the world who would know what that thing is.
Oh, okay, thanks. You don't make me feel so bad.
Yeah, in a case, just to explain a little further, what would happen is the astronomer would do what you did. They would look at their image, they would take the image, identify all the places they want, and then they design that mask so that, you know, all those objects get studied at once. So it's, I mean, that's what a lot of us spend a lot of our time doing.
Oh, I see. So it's still used now. It's pretty.
Oh, it's absolutely used. In fact, it's only been over the last maybe 25 years that we've had that technique. So in the times of Hubble, they would not have had the ability to take spectra of multiple objects at once. They had to do one object at a time. And so this is a newer technique. It's really, as I said, even when I was in graduate school in the early 90s, we didn't really have that technique.
Oh, I see.
So let me ask you, there was one, I don't know the story behind this, but I only heard about this secondhand, is the story, there's something related to spam.
Oh, yeah. And
so I wanted to know what the spam story was, and which art piece is inspired by that spam story.
Oh, no, it's actually, it was a box with, one of the boxes I have the indentation of all the spam boxes, and on the side, I believe it has some sort of, we deduced that it was cases of spam that were once in the boxes. So I imagine the astronomers going up, bringing these cases of, I mean, also it speaks to a certain era, like who's the last person who bought cases of spam to eat, right? Like on almost like a giant camping. Oh yeah, this is the box right here.
We're gonna get to see it now. Yeah.
Oh yeah, so you can see the indentations of the spam.
Oh yes. So that's what the vertical kind of boxes are.
Exactly. So I imagine I love the narrative, them bringing up these boxes of spams and then coming back with these cases of glass plate, photographs. And that was just sort of part of what I had available, it was grabbing, and this was down in the archive somewhere. And and even some of here's the plates. Actually, there was a photographic plate still in here as well, which I started to begin. Oh, I mean, it wasn't exposed. Don't worry, I didn't steal anything. But there was a plate in there, which I sort of played with in the beginning, but I ended up not doing anything with it. But so some of these were all punched in. So there's varying boxes. I basically worked with what I was able to get, and that was kind of the fun part too. Is just like getting what I can get and trying to make do.
So my guess is that what happened was spam was probably very popular on the mountain. So just to explain the process of observing for people, these astronomers would go on the mountain and live on the mountain for very long periods, sometimes weeks at a time. And what they would do is their day would start in the early afternoon, where you get prepared. This is still true today. You get your observations prepared for the evening. You decide what you're going to observe and when. But you basically, and then you spend all night staying up collecting your data, and then you go to sleep at like 6 or 7 a.m. and you wake up again at 2 in the afternoon. So that's what a typical night is like for an astronomer like myself, and I've done hundreds of nights like that. And my guess is what happened probably is that when you're on the mountain, you have to eat, of course. And so they usually have crew that help support the astronomers, that make us meals. So my guess is the spam box and the spam probably were on the mountain already, because they were probably used to feed the astronomers. I'm not sure how interesting, we don't have spam, thankfully, in Chile. Our observatories these days are in Chile that we use. And the food is actually quite good, much better than spam. No offense to anybody who likes spam, but. So, yes, yeah. So you mentioned that you had an earlier project that did astronomy. I'm a little curious about that. And like, if you have a general interest in astronomy, or what is it about astronomy that is interesting to you beyond what you've already said?
Well, the earlier project was kind of the first time really kind of addressing astronomical photography, and I tend to like work in certain genres of photography, but I was buying books and scanning the images, and essentially reusing those for images and reprinting them, not reprinting, but remaking those images. But the materials that I was using was cocaine on black velvet. So I would sprinkle the cocaine and translate these nebulas, essentially these kind of wispy images. And I think that the starkness of the cocaine particle onto the black velvet, and more particularly, it's a photographic black velvet. It's like very light absorption. It pops in a very strange way, and it becomes almost like a star. And I mean, I wasn't I'm not like, I wasn't a cokehead or not a cokehead or anything like that, but I think this idea of translating the universe or translating these images with this sort of mind altering or muscular, whatever altered perceptual thing became interesting to me, because it became about like, how do you really, oh, cool, you got, that's a night sky. So that essentially is just a, so it's cocaine on black velvet, and it's sandwiched between glass. So the cocaine and the velvet is the actual piece. So, you know, if you buy this, you could crack it open and get high if you really wanted to. But so it became about, how do you really translate the universe? Because for me, it's like this, it hurts my head to really try to fathom how expansive this space really is. And so this was a material that I began to work with. And I think also my studio was in Hollywood at the time. So there's a lot of cheesy cocaine on black velvet seemed like it made sense or something like that in a weird way. But yeah, that was the first project that I made. And also to me, it was interesting to think about this work in relationship to selling art, you know, and like having my art dealer sell these cocaine pieces was an interesting circumstance for me, but that's a whole nother issue. But so that was my intro into working with astronomy pictures, because I was buying all these books and learning more about it. And I kind of wish I had a class on it when I was younger, but I do feel like now there's more, I don't know, more access to astronomy information. I don't know, I mean, I feel like, what do you think about these like NASA logo t-shirts that all the cool kids are wearing now? Like, how do you feel like astronomy is, you know, I feel like it's cool, right? It's like,
yeah, no, I think that there is a coolness factor to astronomy, and I think it's been there for a while. But I give a lot of the credit for that for the Hubble Space Telescope, named after Edwin Hubble, of course. The reason, they just have these beautiful images, you know, that take these images to the next level. And I think that they're very good. Those images, but that just sell astronomy. People see those images and they're just fascinated by it. So I think, you know, I think people just love that. It's very rare that I meet somebody when I tell them I'm an astronomer that doesn't go, oh, that's really amazing, or that's really cool. You know, it is just one of those things. I think almost everybody has some interest in understanding the universe and where we came from and such. And that's really what astronomy is about. But I think that over the last 30 years, the Hubble Space Telescope just had its anniversary last Friday, I think, or sometime last week. It's been 30 years now. And over that 30 years, that telescope has really helped keep images on people's minds, you know. So you see a lot more than you would have when I was a kid. I was very fascinated by astronomy as a kid, but there wasn't, you know, of course there wasn't internet, and it was a lot harder. You had to just find books. Now it's like, it's hard to read the news without some astronomy story almost every day now, which is great for astronomers.
yeah, definitely.
That.
Do you,
have you ever,
oh, sorry, what? Oh, no,
no,
I was going to ask maybe like a silly question, but
sure.
I'm curious about knowing more about the universe, because I know when I'm sort of upset or sad, it's always reassuring to think about myself in the universe and realize like my problems aren't that big. And I'm wondering, as a culture, we know more about astronomy. Do you think it helps reduce the therapy bills?
I don't know if it helps the bills so much, but what I always say is that astronomy gives you perspective on everything. And so, yeah, I mean, I think you're actually right. I mean, your problems are, there's not that your problems aren't important to you, but of course they are smaller than the problems that exist wide just across the world, let alone the universe, right? And I mean, astronomy really, when you really dive into it, you just realize just how small and in some ways very insignificant we and the Earth are. Now, that said, I always like to remind people that we know of planets, around about 4,000 planets now in the universe, besides beyond our solar system. That's a lot of planets. We still don't know any that look like Earth. We don't know any that have oceans, that have oxygen in their atmosphere, and that have life. And so we're still very special at this moment, at least. But I think astronomy does give you some kind of perspective. And it's, you know, for me, when I was a kid, I just would like to look up and see it, and what was out there, you know. I wondered about that, and that's really what kind of got me in. And I think that's the other great thing about astronomy is that a lot of children find it very interesting. It's one of those things, you can talk about dinosaurs and stars, and people usually find that all kids find that kind of fascinating. So it's a great way to get kids interested in other sciences by just kind of introducing them to science in general.
Yeah, so I'm assuming maybe you didn't grow up in LA because you can see the stars.
I actually grew up in the Bay Area, which was not much better. It was a little bit better, but no. It's funny because I talked to some kids a couple days ago. I gave one of these Zoom presentations, and somebody asked me, where do we see stars? And I said, well, you're not in a great location to see stars, but you're not very far from a location that's quite good. I mean, you could drive an hour out of town, you go to the desert, and it's really quite spectacular. If you go Joshua Trees, great. So there are places to still see the stars. You just have to get out of Los Angeles, unfortunately. Yes.
Oh, cool.
So how are we doing on time here? Camilla, do we have, I also want to let people know that if they have questions, we really did want this to be very interactive. There's a Q&A button. I don't know if we're getting questions or not, but if anybody has any questions for either of us, please send those our way, and we'll be happy to talk about them a little bit more.
Or not.
I'm unmuting myself.
Oh, okay.
There took me a second. I think it'd be a good time to pull in a few of the other people. So I'm actually going to pull in Anthony and Tony and Erica for a moment. Give me 1 second. And where is Erica?
Hopefully she's there.
Yes.
We're all having Zoom experiences.
There
they are.
Here.
Hi.
Erica is well, while Erica's getting her video, there she goes. It would be helpful, since this relationship was actually started, and this project was started through Tony and Erica's relationship. I thought it would be helpful maybe for John and Matthew as well, for one or both of you to illuminate us on how this whole project started, and even some of the history that I mentioned briefly of Erica's CV and Tony's CV. If one or both of you wants to give a little bit of information, that'd be great.
Well, I've known Erica for years, since her days at MoCA. Our dear friend is Richard Koshalik, who's been working with Erica for decades. My father was chairman of MoCA for 5 years and is a life trustee. So I've known her very well, and I knew her at the Hirshhorn too. She's done just great work, and I've always respected her. So, I called her up one day and I said, well, what are you doing? She says, well, I'm working at the Carnegie Observatory, and I've always loved astronomy, and I was immediately interested. So I said, let's do a field trip and go down to the Carnegie. So we met Erica, and we were fortunate enough to meet John there. And at some point we said, you know what, I think Matthew Brandt, we talked about his previous work with that cocaine field that he so eloquently described. And you could see the pictures earlier. And we thought that would be a good fit. We had worked with Matthew at the Venice Family Clinic. We did a benefit edition for them. And he took a photograph of a doctor's office, and he poured liquids of medicines and liquids on top of the photograph. So each photo was unique. So we had a challenge here because Matthew doesn't really do editions. Most of his work is he immerses himself in whatever he's fascinated with, and he makes unique work. So we were thinking, how can we do an edition with Matthew? So then when we saw this fantastic archive, we were really, really excited about it. And that's when we brought Matthew down, which he told you about that experience.
I'm pleased to add a couple of comments to that as well. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
First of all, thanks so much to Lapis, to Tony, to Camilla, to everyone there for the chance to have this, I think, very, very interesting dialogue about art and science. It's something that's always interested me. As a musician myself, as someone who has scientists in my family, I've always had this kind of conversation in my life. So I was very, very pleased when Tony contacted us. I've also known Fred for many years. He was the chairman of the board when I was at MoCA many years ago. I won't say how many years ago. And I think the title for today's talk could be applicable to so many of the arts. And Matthew, you really said it. You said, how do you translate the universe? And I think that's a fantastic theme for the dialogue between art and science. And I hope this launches other ones as well. But it's really a very complex issue, to put it mildly. But for example, I think musicians, music, Bach, You know, there's always allusions to Bach and the universe. There's always allusions in literature to science. So onward, let's do more of this.
Yeah, thank you.
Cool.
And I'll remind that the upcoming PST, if it can happen, is the mixture of science and art. So we have more opportunities to discuss this in the future, thanks to the Getty and their initiative.
Yes.
I'm also going to bring in Christy.
Camilla?
Yes.
We are also partnering in an initiative having to do with PST. When and if things reopen, we're doing something with the county museum. I think that's public knowledge now.
Well, it certainly is now. So
they're doing a huge exhibition on the history of cosmology in many cultures. And we were delighted that they came to us to work with us on this.
That's great. Now we have Christy here. We have one question from Scooby-Doo. That's what their screen name is. Talking about the kind of more physicality of the work. So the question was, how did you get the light to shine through so many holes at once, which I know you touched on briefly. And then maybe a nice follow-up question for Christy was paper choice and just kind of, I mean, we know here how delicate the surface of these prints are, but maybe that can be the follow-up with Christy afterwards, after Matthew explains the light shining process.
Oh yeah, so I essentially, because where you move the hole, where the hole hits the sun, it's going to have a bigger flare. So I essentially just shot shots, different areas of the box with different sun flares, and basically selected what sun flares I wanted and then stitched them all together in one image. So to make one image, it's going to be several shots because of the different flares that happen. If that makes sense. So imagine me in front of the box of the sun, moving, shooting a bunch of pictures like that, and like going over around. I'm like, oh, that's a really good flare. That's a really good one. And like really trying to get in that box, and then going back to the computer and then basically photoshopping it all together.
I know that's a very digital process, but what I find interesting when I'm talking with clients and people who are viewing the work is that's also deeply rooted in the history of photography, is taking compilation images, not only for the aesthetic quality of photography, but also the scientific quality of photography was compilation images. And so one of the earliest images that we have that is referenced in every art class is they were trying to take images of horses as they were running to get the moment when all four legs are off the ground. Like, it was an aesthetic process, but it was a series of compilation of images laid on top of each other for a scientific purpose. And so I think that what's really fascinating about these images when I'm talking to people is that they're strangely philosophically encompassing the history of photography. Oh. Whether or not that was your intention, they are, because pinhole cameras are the earliest image uses of photography or format of photography. And when you're a kid, one of the first things you try and take an image of is the stars, which is an exercise in futility because it's so hard. I mean, it's easier now. Kids have it good with digital cameras, but when you had your disposables, you can't take that image. But yeah. On to Christy, if you want to explain the choice of the paper choice and the kind of the delicate nature of the print, that'd be great.
Sure. Well, we do, when we're collaborating, we're always looking to be open to what's going to work best for the project. So we did a lot of tests and we had a lot of ideas in the beginning, tried it, looking at them on matte papers, but what lent itself the best was high gloss, iridescent kind of metallic paper. So it really captured the subtleties between the light and dark of the flares and some of that nebulous action that happens with the light, but they are quite delicate. It's a high gloss surface, so it shows any little scratch or issue immediately. It's black, so it's even more apparent catching the light.
Christy, who makes that paper? Where is it made?
It's made by Moab. It's it's one of their, they have a few beautiful papers, and this one is a slick rock metallic pearl.
And I think it was kind of difficult to make it. Yeah, I think there was some challenges in printing it because you want to be able to register the scene as stars, but you want to see the box as well. So it was like this push and pull, like how do you do that in like just the right way, I think. So thank you.
My pleasure, of course.
Another question we have from one of my favorite people is, can John talk about how astronomy has become less of a visual medium and how it has become more advanced? And how does Matthew think these representations that exceed the visual but need to be mediated in a visual format? So we'll start with John, and then I'll reiterate the second half of the question for Matthew about the less visual quality.
Sure. I mean, I think it's still visual at some level. I think what you may mean is that it's gotten to the stage where we spend a lot of effort. Well, one, I talked about spectroscopy, which is not the same as taking an image. It's like looking at the light in detail. That's probably the fundamental change. If you went back to 1920, people like Edwin Hubble would have been mostly taking images directly, the ones that Matthew used. Where now everything is done by looking at the light in detail as opposed to an actual image. So that's one way. I guess the other way might just be also just the interpretation. We spend a lot more time now trying to understand the physics behind how things move, as opposed to just taking pictures and kind of cataloging them. And astronomy used to be much more of that, 100 years ago. But we still need those images because all we really have as astronomers is light. And so you're getting light in one way or another. It just is not necessarily, in a visually compelling image always, is what I would say. So, and for me, it would be kind of terrible if we didn't have those images. That's what makes it so fun and attractive to me. It's what got me into it as a kid. So I still think there's an element of that. It's just our jobs are definitely much more technical and more analysis and things of that sort. But we still need those images. And
there's also the light from the X-ray.
There's lights, yes, there's lights at other wavelengths. That's right. So when we see, I showed you this Hubble image. This was the visual light. That's what we're dealing with in Matthew's case too. But of course, things in the universe emit all different types of light. So we have ultraviolet, radio, infrared, X-ray, and they all teach us new things. And in a lot of those fields, they're very new. We've only been doing, X-ray astronomy for 50 years or something. And so there's still a lot of room to work and grow in those areas.
And then for Matthew, one of my favorite quotes from another artist, from Rashid Johnson, is that humans are unique in our ability to visualize things that aren't there. And that's what makes art so interesting. So I think that's part of this question here is there's things that we want to talk about that go beyond the visual, but part of your job and the onus we put upon you as an artist is to capture that in some ways, to make something tangible that goes beyond the immediate thing we see. So maybe you could talk a bit about that in your practice and how you approach your work.
Well, I feel like with this work in particular, I thought it was important to allow a viewer to project as well. And I think that's part of the work too, is putting your head in the box and seeing the universe, is allowing someone to just zone out in front of it. And I think that's some of the power of having this sort of simplicity of a box, is that you can sit there and zone out and see it and imagine that, oh, maybe that is like, I don't know, a nebula, or this is that galaxy or whatever, and see these things that may or may not be there. And I think it's that projection that I'm trying to just sort of present to a viewer in a lot of ways.
Isn't that what you do, is visualize things that aren't there? I mean, you talked about all the planets that have been discovered, but there hasn't been an Earth-like planet. But you're not actually seeing them. You're just taking the chemical analysis of them. And how do you know if there's lakes or atmosphere?
Yeah, though a lot of it is through, a lot of times it is inferred from various things. Well, I like to remind people, most of the universe is made of these dark components we don't see, called dark matter and dark energy. And they're implied just by the motions of the things we do see. You imply the existence of a lot of things that you don't see, and that is how a lot of things work. We only have the stuff that produces light is only about 4% of the universe. The other 96% is dark, and then never visible to us as astronomers. So, yeah, that's what we got to work with. It's what the universe gives.
May I ask a question about, you know, the colors of like X-rays, usually like blue or gamma green, or is that assigned, or how do the colors? Oh, okay, so that's like someone was like, that's going to be that, and then.
Yeah, they are assigned if it's not visible light. When you see a Hubble image where, which is invisible light, they often, what they do is they're taking images in different energy bands. So what you do is you put a filter in, just as you would on a camera. You put a red filter in, you take an image of it in red light, a green filter in blue. That we can do that with the Hubble Space Telescope. And then so those images you see that the Hubble are actually based on those, how much green versus blue versus red. And so those are real. X-rays, your eyes wouldn't see them. And so you have to do some sort of interpretation. So at that point, you're just assigning a color scheme
Yeah.
that we think is appealing.
Because I feel like there's something always cool about when I do look at astronomy photography. Sometimes I'm like, wow, that's amazing. And then underneath it says artistic illustration, you know? There's this like imagination, information blend that I'm always fascinated in by looking at. And also the colors, it's like, wait, how does that work, you know? It's cool.
Yeah, but sometimes you have to be careful what you're seeing. What you're seeing is what you would not necessarily always see with your eye. With those Hubble images, that is what you'd see with your eye because your eye sees over the same kind of energies that the Hubble does.
Because that's one thing I thought of too for this project. I was thinking, oh, okay, do an infrared filter and really play with that, but I thought it was like too much information maybe.
Matthew, have you ever looked through a very large telescope?
No, I looked through a really like bad one when I was a kid, and all I saw was like there was a really nice man somewhere like doing it, and he allowed me to look, and I just saw like it was black space and like this very strange dot, and I acted like I saw it, and I was impressed, but I really, you know, I don't know, I feel like I was a bit let down by this large. I just feel like I let him down by not seeing it, so I was like, yeah, that was great, I saw it, but I have to say, no, I haven't had the opportunity yet to really fully.
I will tell you as an astronomer, because we go to many schools where we bring telescopes and we set them up and we have kids look through it. We always know if you've seen it or not.
I see. Oh, okay. So that part person probably knew.
You're not fooling anybody when you say, I saw it. If your answer is I saw it and not, oh my gosh, that's great, then you haven't seen it.
Oh, I see.
Matthew, I think we know some people, so maybe you can go out and
we can arrange
that.
Okay, cool, yeah. I'll bring my plates.
Matthew, does this project inspire you to do other astronomy projects, and are you interested in the other sciences as well in terms of artistic production?
Oh yeah, I mean, I would love to do more astronomy-based work too. I feel like it's sort of just a very deep well, and we're learning so much more, and I feel like it's a lot of material to work with, and it just stimulates so much the imagination. In terms of other sciences, I'm working with like a marine biologist and growing algae on photographs. So a lot like algae grows in light, sort of working with photographs to make that way is one thing that I'm working on. And I've gotten pretty good at killing algae growths because it's hard to make, you know, I'm like trying to clean things in my microwave. I don't have the proper tools, and I realize you need the proper tools to do a lot of these things. And have a dirty studio that I'm really trying to put things together. I'm like, it seems sanitized, you know, but it's really not. And, you know, it's hard.
Actually, another question we have from a viewer is asking about one of the things that I think draws a lot of people to your work, Matthew, and this is also a question for Christy, is that even though many people would probably describe you as a photographer, your work is much more physical in some ways. So like I think you went to the Falkland Islands recently.
Oh, the Marshall Islands.
Marshall Islands recently. Different battle happened at the Falkland Islands to work with because there were a lot of atomic tests there. So you're working with the water there, or you did a series in using the Flint, Michigan, which is still notoriously not clean, using the water to develop the images. And so a lot of your work has a very physical nature to it, or even the cocaine pieces, which some people use that and go into outer space. So it's a whole other experience. But we had a question about what you think the future of digital photography is, and do you think this is where your work is is where the overall field is moving, as more people have access to cameras that are really good on their phone? Do you think your work kind of pushes the whole field forward? And that's also a question for Christy too, is how she views the future of digital photography, which is probably a very apt question right now, as we're all sitting in each other's living rooms in a digital format. So if you want to start, Matthew.
I feel like it's just inevitable. I mean, people take such great pictures. I'm always amazed with the iPhone, and I'm like, it's like so good. It's amazing. You can take it and you don't have to bracket, do all this extra stuff. And I think that everyone being able to make really good pictures just sort of makes my job a little bit more fun, because I can get physical with it. And I think it's, and I do use my iPhone for some projects because it has a great readily accessibility, you know, versus like dragging out the big, large format or whatever. And I think it's just, it's becoming more about access. Like you get access to very weird things like GoPros, and you can go underwater and take photographs now, as, you know, I don't know, you couldn't really do that before with conventional photography or like that easily. But I don't feel like my work's necessarily going to become more digital per se. I mean, I think it's an interesting terrain of how perception links with technologies and how that they interrelate with each other. And I think we're going to see and experience the world very differently because of how we see ourselves differently. But I don't know where that's going. I can't really say. But for me, I just love the tactility and the physicality of things. And I don't know, I like to touch things, you know, I don't know, personally.
And that's where things for you differ than for John, who simply can't touch what he's studying.
Yeah, Christy, what about you? And I mean, you're dealing with a lot of the new technology that comes out all the time, but in some ways we're also dealing with the very traditional formats of printing and like printer heads. But where do you see, where are you most excited about digital photography moving and printing, and what makes you excited about this field?
Well, I've seen that, you know, as the technology has expanded, you're able to print on a wide variety of materials. And that, of course, is always exciting. The more tools that you can add, you know, to your arsenal, the more creative you can become. So it just opens up more possibility for creating artworks than ever before. But still, you know, the best thing about every new leap forward is that it's built on the foundation of what we've already done. So you kind of understand it through that lens as well. It's, you know, it's still based on, you know, these ideas of light and the sensitivity to light. So, you know, I like that there's a constant as well as these wonderful leaps forward in technology and what we can do with it.
Tony and Christy, I wondered if you could comment on some of the special technologies you have there at Lapis in terms of very special printers.
Yeah.
It's not the printer, it's who does the printing.
Who does the printing, yeah.
It's the printer.
She's on the screen right now, yeah.
Printers, you know, anybody can use, but it's what do we have to offer to artists with the printers that they couldn't do. And Christy's been working with me for a long, long time, and she's about as good as anybody is around. And it's a real asset to have somebody like that. And she collaborates really well with artists. She speaks their language, and we're hopeful we're going to be making many new additions in the future.
It's always been my favorite thing is the collaborative process, and that is the space where you make great work. And when you can come together and make something that individually would not have come into being, I mean, that's the special sauce. That's it.
That's why when we visited Carnegie, and we just thought of Matt immediately, that he'd be perfect for this, because you immerse yourself in the work. And this was, being in that archive was really a special place to be. And I knew it would inspire you. So, I mean, that's what we're in the inspiration business, all of us.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Just a couple more questions before we wrap up. Next one is for Erica. Actually, maybe for all of us, but I'll start with Erica, is that you've worked in both fields, which the outside world might think are very different, with art and science, but I personally have interacted with a lot of more science math types. I grew up with an organic chemist and an econometricist as my parents, and the questions about art and science are actually very similar for each group. And I was curious if you notice the same thing when you talk with your constituents from the Carnegie versus the constituents from arts organizations, if the dialogue is similar about how they're engaging with the institution, but also the importance of having funding that allows people to do something unencumbered and not worrying about, you know, teaching or looking for funding, and just the importance of doing art for the sake of art and science for the sake of science, if you want to touch on that.
I think you've, in a sense, answered your question, which is that, of course, artists and any artistic organization cannot fetter the creative person, but scientists are creative too, and I think people don't realize that, and I think that's what makes the Carnegie so unusual in science. I really literally know of no other place in the world where scientists can pursue what they need to pursue as long as they need to pursue it without the pressure to teach and to publish. And yet it's a highly educational institution, because this is where so many young astronomers, the next generations, launch their careers. And, you know, unfettered curiosity is really the basis for art and science, both. And so the ability to exercise that curiosity is what drives productive results. Does that answer your question somewhat?
Yeah, and I think you'd be hard pressed to find someone if you were to describe the nuts and bolts of what Matthew does or what John does, and for someone not to say that Matthew's not a scientist and for someone to say that John's not an artist, because what they're both doing requires deep technical understanding and deep aesthetic ability to translate information for other people. So I think there's a very interesting crossover between both industries, both mediums, and both ways of thinking.
And also the ability to simply stick with it, to keep looking, and looking. There's a great quote by the writer E.L. Doctorow, who said that writing is like driving in fog with your headlights, and you can only see as far as you can see, but you keep going. So that's what science and artistic pursuits are often alike in.
Oh, that's great. And I think the discussion we'll wrap up on is the forthcoming projects for Matthew and John, and what they're looking forward to. And it's an interesting time to have projects too, because particularly for Matthew, you're making things and you're not sure when they're going to be opening, which we touched on briefly. But also John, when you're fortunate to be in an institution that you don't have to worry about funding, but the world of science is always under siege for needing validity, as well as the arts. So maybe both Matthew and John can talk about what's next for them. Matthew?
Oh, okay. I sort of just opened a show that's sort of not up now at M&B Gallery. It's called Vatna Yoko, and they're pictures that I took of icebergs in Iceland, and they're heated sea prints, so I had a flame torch and all that stuff. So that's up at M&B, and I guess coming up, I've been working a lot with glass, so I've been fascinated to see the production of telescopes and stuff. So I have my little kiln making glass works currently, and there's some exhibitions like in Urartu Museum next year in St. Petersburg, and also another exhibition at the Forest Lawn Museum in Glendale is going to be next year, curated by Colin Westerback, and maybe a show in New York, but that was scheduled for the fall, but I don't know if that's happening anymore. So I don't know. Now I could just relax.
Is there anything that keeps you up while you're at night where you're like, I wish I need to get that, or like I need to capture this or figure out how this works? Is there anything that right now when your mind's racing at night that you're kind of gnawing on?
No, it's more so just realizing all the broken stuff around the house and trying
That's fair.
like I hear the faucet leaking and I'm like, I'm gonna get to that tomorrow. So it's mostly just domestic stuff, I guess.
That's nice. It's one of the blessings of this moment. John, what's coming up for you?
Well, you know, we're always working on the next telescopes and the next generation of facilities. And we have a big telescope called the Giant Magellan Telescope we're building in Chile, which is very exciting. It'll have a basically equivalent of an 80-foot mirror, so it's huge advance over this whole, yeah, it's just tremendous. And that'll hopefully be coming online. That's a big task for us this decade, sometime this decade that'll be online. There's a follow-up to the Hubble Space Telescope coming hopefully next year called the James Webb Space Telescope, which would be very interesting. It should allow us to see the very, very first stars and galaxies forming in the universe. So we're very excited about that. And something more immediate that may be of interest to folks in Southern California is we have a new visualization lab we're opening at Carnegie. There's not a space like this that I know of, at least in astronomy. It's a room with basically, how do I describe it? A giant, basically slab of computers or TVs. You could think of it like a giant, almost a big screen TV, in a sense that kind of wraps around. And the idea is to do virtual reality and 3D renderings of simulations that we do in astronomy and data. So you'll be able to walk into data and see distance things, and it's very interactive space. So this can be very exciting, and that we are hoping will be online later this summer. So here in Pasadena, so that'll be very exciting.
Matthew, it's another kind of box. You'll have to come see it.
Yeah,
It is.
there's some holes in it.
Yeah, no holes.
No.
Well, that's great. Thank you all so much, and thank you for everyone who tuned in. I personally really enjoyed this. I think everyone else did, based upon the text messages I've received and the messages that we've received on here. This has been recorded, so I will be uploading it to either Vimeo or YouTube. So be on the lookout for that if you wanted to share this with any of your science and art friends. And then be on the lookout for more events online, either at one of Matthew's galleries or from Lapis or the Carnegie. So thank you all, and I hope everyone has a good rest of their Thursday and a good rest of their week.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.